Welcome to JS on Politics. I'm your host, Greg Borowski. A very busy week and a very busy show, so let's take a look at what's ahead on today's broadcast. Donald Trump was back in town. Does that mean Wisconsin is in play again? We look back at Monday's debate, how it played out in public perception and in the polls, and how did Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump fare on the truthometer. We'll get a quick update on the Lincoln Hills story, touch on some local issues, take a look at our winners and losers of the week, and we'll take some viewer questions. But first, let's start with that Donald Trump visit yesterday. We've joined by Bill Glauber, one of our political reporters, Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief. Both were at that speech and rally in Waukesha. What was the what was the reception for him out there? Friendly, of course, but what did you think?
Friendly, a little impatient. He was running late, had an interview to do on O'Reilly Live while people were waiting in the hall. Very enthusiastic once he hit the stage, and probably gives him a little bit of hope going forward.
What was your sense, Craig? I mean, he had kind of a rocky performance in the debate,
right,
and he's coming to Wisconsin, so...
Yeah, and there's some hangover from the debate. I mean, everybody, I think the consensus about the debate was that he was not at his best. He was not very disciplined. He spent too much time on defense and not enough time on offense. We heard a little bit at this event his complaints about the debate, and usually the side that's complaining about the debate is the side that lost the debate. What's interesting is the Republicans have been very candid in Wisconsin about his Achilles heel, which is Waukesha. It's southeastern Wisconsin. He's not winning by as much as a Republican needs to win by in that part of the state, so it was a good move for him to come to this part of the state. I think the race is probably shifting a little bit in Clinton's direction in the national polling. We'll see what it looks like in Wisconsin. But if he wants to compete in Wisconsin, he has to energize voters, Republican voters.
Let's talk about that aspect because, I mean, on the one hand, you go, well, he's coming back to Wisconsin. You had that story from Tommy Thompson saying, Don, come back. The state's back in play. But then you have to go to Waukesha, where it should be pretty solid for you. So what is that? What was your sense, Bill, about how the state? Why is he in Waukesha, not in Green Bay or some other part of the state?
They have still not coalesced around him. This was intended to drive Republicans home back to the Republican ticket, which Craig may disagree. I think they're going to get there, and they will. They have to. They have no other place to go. But it is a little strange to have to hold an event in Waukesha with 6 weeks to go, little less than 6 weeks to go in the campaign. You should be in other parts of the state, like Wausau, like Green Bay, and they're not.
The silver lining for him, if there is one, is that he's actually doing. He's got bigger leads in northern Wisconsin and in Green Bay over Hillary Clinton than Mitt Romney had over Barack Obama 4 years ago. So he's overperforming a little in other parts of the state. So if he can get a normal performance for a Republican out of southeastern Wisconsin, that's good for him. Most of these people are going to come back to him, but if there's any drop-off, and there has to be some in either turnout or Republican support for him in this very Republican, very vital, high turnout part of the state, that makes it harder to win statewide.
Going forward, I thought what was interesting wasn't necessarily Trump, who did excoriate Clinton. There was no question about it. But were the comments of Rudy Giuliani, who was really harsh on Mrs. Clinton, on former President Bill Clinton. It was very harsh, very personal. Maybe because the guy didn't run against Hillary Clinton in 2000, he's getting, for Senate, he's getting it all out now. But I think you can probably preview the way this campaign is headed in the gutter by what Giuliani
what
said.
Was the gist? I mean, if there is a takeaway from the message, just setting aside the
Clintons are sleazy and we're tired of it. That was the message.
Is that the message that was the message?
Yeah, and
voters
that is a message that helps in these base Republican areas, because the one thing that unifies these Republican voters is their dislike of Hillary Clinton. I mean, Marquette had a poll a few months ago where 1% of the Republican voters in Wisconsin had a favorable view of Hillary Clinton and 98% had a negative view. So that tells you something. I mean, the other striking thing about this event was he continues to come before conservative Republican audiences in Wisconsin and make an argument for African American votes, which he did. He spent a considerable amount of time on again at this event in Waukesha for predicting that African American voters aren't going to vote for Hillary Clinton because they're too smart for that. I think he's certainly got a better chance of unifying Republican voters in the southeastern suburbs than he does of getting a better percentage of African American voters than Mitt Romney got 4 years ago.
So if you're Hillary Clinton and the Democrats, are you concerned? We haven't seen Hillary Clinton back in the States. Do they feel pretty comfortable with where Wisconsin is, do you suspect?
I think yes, and I think I think we'll see her eventually. Whether or not it's out of concern, it would just be the logical thing for them and/or President Obama, who's popular here, to come to Wisconsin. But until the Clinton campaign spends money on television in Wisconsin, until she comes back more than once to Wisconsin, that will send us a signal that they think they're safe in the state.
You have some surrogates this week. Ann Holton, the wife of Tim Kaine, was in Milwaukee on today, Thursday. Chelsea Clinton, the daughter of Hillary Clinton, is going to be in Green Bay Friday. So far they're doing it with surrogates, no advertising, so you know they have to feel confident about where things are in Wisconsin.
All right, well, let's shift now to some discussion of the fallout from the debate on Monday night. So sometimes it takes a couple days for things to sort of settle in. How has this one settled in? I mean, everyone seems to agree it's not good for Donald Trump. Is Hillary getting benefit in the polls, Craig? I mean, what are we?
Well,
what are we
she
seeing?
is. The polls are shifting a little bit. The early polls we've seen there's some signs of a shift in her direction. Now, whether that's just kind of a natural bounce back to where the race was, before the conventions, or whether it's driven by the debate, we won't know and don't know. But the race has kind of oscillated between a near tie and a 4 or 5 point Clinton lead, and it got up. Whenever it gets up to a near tie, it falls back to a small Clinton lead. That seems to be kind of the spectrum, and Donald Trump needs to move that spectrum in his direction so that when the race swings toward him, he's not 1 point behind her, he's 1 or 2 points ahead of her.
So I don't think you can underplay what an incredible lost opportunity the first debate was for Donald Trump. He's basically trying to convince the American people that he's prepared to be president in a year where it would look like there would be a change vote. He failed, and failed miserably by all accounts, by the polling, by his reactions after this debate. So he has to, it was a tremendously missed opportunity, and he's going to have to make up for it in the next debate.
How do you think he does that? Because if you look at the commentary after the debate, even as what he was talking about in his surrogates, they're talking about Lester Holt was unfair as the moderator. They're dealing with the beauty pageant issue that Hillary Clinton
these are all things you want to deal with, of course.
Really what he wants to be talking about, right?
Yeah. He has to come up with credible answers when he faces the voters, which is who he will be facing in the second debate.
The format in the next debate is different. It's a town hall format. So I think that, if his answer to the first debate is to be more aggressive and go on the attack, I'm not sure that's the right tack to take. I think, and it may not be the right tack for Hillary Clinton either, who was very aggressive in attacking Donald Trump in the first debate. Different forum, I don't think that works as well. I think what he needs to do is was what we thought he would try to do in the first debate, which is appear more presidential, sober, thoughtful, and he needs to be able to articulate on policy more than just the sound bites. And that's what a town hall forum requires of a candidate.
Right. And in that case, you're getting the questions obviously from real voters. So who do you think has shown the better ability to sort of relate? That's been a challenge for both of them, right? Even for Hillary Clinton to say, well, she can relate to the average person. Now you're going to be talking to the average person. So who
well, I think
do you think fares better?
She's shown the ability to speak, fluently about public policy and speak in the language of public policy and a politician. She has not shown as much the ability to connect emotionally with voters, and that's her challenge.
In this format, Hillary Clinton, by all accounts, does very well in small settings with voters. This is a small setting with a voter. It's going to be televised to 100 million or so people, but that's what it's going to be. So I would think she would have the advantage simply on the format going in. It'll be fascinating to watch.
All right, before we leave the discussion of the debate from the other night, is there any statement you heard from either of the candidates that were most likely to hear going forward, say by the opponent, to say, okay, that was a gaffe or a blunder that's going to keep getting brought up?
I'm not sure there's a single sort of gaffe in Hillary Clinton's case, but I think the first debate, just as it showed it was a missed opportunity for Donald Trump, it did show her vulnerabilities. I mean, she's a very familiar political figure in a kind of a change election, a change atmosphere. And she was weak when he challenged her connected her to the status quo. Why haven't things changed? You've been around forever. She's going to have to needs to be able to answer that question more effectively. I think his defense of his business record was awkward and clumsy, and I think
Taxes, not paying
that's
taxes,
the
we
one
don't know, but
the-
I mean that's really the one that is sort of the tape we might see, going forward about where he basically said, why. I would spend it better than the government, essentially, is what he was saying.
Yeah,
so maybe something like that.
That makes me smart
Yes.
for not paying taxes, which makes people may feel like they're chumps or something for paying taxes. So, all right, well, there'll be many more discussions on the future debates going forward. Right now, we're going to take a look at this tape segment, looking at some of the statements from the candidates on the Truth-O-Meter. So in the presidential debate the other night, Hillary Clinton twice admonished fact-checkers to just get busy, and our colleagues at PolitiFact National certainly were. We're joined now by Tom Kircher, a reporter for PolitiFact Wisconsin, to roll through a few of those items that were fact-checked from the debate the other night. And we're going to start with this item from Donald Trump. The claim was, he said that top Clinton advisors, this was in 2008, were pressing birther movement stories very hard, and that rating was false.
Yeah, Trump did cite a couple of people, Sidney Blumenthal and Patty Solis Doyle, who have been longtime aides to Hillary Clinton, but there's just no evidence that either one of them was involved in spreading rumors that Obama was not born in America.
All right, this next one is from Hillary Clinton, who said the only years that anybody's ever seen of Donald Trump's tax returns showed that he didn't pay any federal income tax, and that one was rated mostly false.
So none of his returns have been released. That's been a lot of controversy over that. But for 5 years, there have been some records about his tax returns released. In those 5 years, he paid no taxes twice, did pay taxes 3 times.
Right, and those were released as part of some gambling applications for casinos in different places.
Right, he had to release different documents for that.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, and this claim is from Donald Trump. In Chicago, they've had thousands of shootings, thousands since January 1, thousands of shootings. So, Tom, that was rated true.
True, keeping in mind he's talking about shootings. There have been more than 3,000 shooting victims in Chicago so far this year. In terms of homicides, the number is 550, but he's correct on the number of shootings.
All right, and from Hillary Clinton, she said that Donald Trump started his career back in 1973 being sued by the Justice Department for racial discrimination because he would not rent apartments in one of his developments to African Americans, and that one was rated true.
Yeah, back in '73, the U.S. Justice Department did sue Donald Trump and his father and their company. The allegation was that they were denying applications from tenants who were black. That case was settled out of court, but that was the allegation.
All right, this one from Donald Trump is kind of an oldie but a goodie. I did not support the war in Iraq. The record shows that I'm right, and that was rated false.
When he was first asked about it, that we know of publicly in 2002, should we invade, he said, I guess so. In statements leading up to the actual invasion, he never expressed any opposition. He only expressed opposition to the invasion more than a year after it occurred.
All right, and finally this one from Hillary Clinton, who says Donald Trump publicly invited Putin, so this is Russian President Vladimir Putin, to hack into Americans' emails. That was rated half true.
Clinton did make reference to 30,000 emails, hoping the Russians could find those. That was a clear reference to Hillary Clinton's emails at the State Department, but Trump did not make a reference to Russians finding Americans' emails in general.
All right, so those are some of the claims from the debate the other night. There are many more of them that you can find at PolitiFact.com. You can follow our fact checks at PolitiFactWisconsin.com as the election approaches. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
You bet.
So we're going to shift now to some state and local issues, starting at the state level with this tape segment looking at the issues facing Lincoln Hills and how that story has been progressing. We're joined now by Patrick Marley, one of our Madison Bureau reporters who's written extensively over almost the past year about Lincoln Hills, the juvenile facility in northern Wisconsin, and all the problems up there. So Patrick, the first story was in December of last year, and the investigation had been ongoing at that point already for approximately a year by the FBI. What's sort of the latest for our viewers in terms of what has been revealed through your reporting over these past many months?
Yeah, so we don't know a whole lot about the investigation itself, which happened in December of 2015, other than the place was raided, shut down while they interviewed staff and they interviewed the inmates there. They'd been looking at this place for a year before they did that, and the reason they finally went up there with 50 agents and attorneys was because they developed evidence that public records were being destroyed, and they wanted to preserve everything they could. So they downloaded video off of the hard drives there, and they seized paper records. Using the open records law and interviews, we've found in the 9 months, 10 months since then, about a number of problems there that range everything from, just sort of not very much oversight on the way things are run and problem employees not being detected as having problems, to various serious incidents where inmates were hurt, where in one case an officer got in physical fights with inmates and did that deliberately out of the range of the cameras of the facility.
Yeah, and what has some of the fallout been so far? I know in Milwaukee County there's a lot of concern about sending juveniles there, but they haven't really been able to resolve it because there's not a lot of other opportunities. But what are some of the other things that have happened consequentially since your reporting began?
Yeah, so since the beginning of the year, we've seen a wholesale change both at the institution and the State Department of Corrections. We have a new secretary, new top managers at the facility itself, all the top managers at the Department of Corrections, so all the people who report directly to the secretary have been replaced. They've put in body cameras there. They've installed more still cameras there. They've given additional training. Some people have been fired. Some people have been retired amid the investigations. So those are some of the more significant things that we've seen. Meanwhile, places like Milwaukee County are trying to figure out what to do with the kids that they send there. That's something local communities are facing everywhere, though I would say most of the people who are at Lincoln Hills come from southeast Wisconsin. The problem is that if they don't send them there, they don't really have a place to keep these juveniles. Elsewhere, I think many people who want to have reform would have more sort of localized settings within the community, but that takes money and that takes time to plan.
All right, well, let's look ahead as best we can. So if it's been in December, it'll be 2 years since they really began their investigation. Is there any expectation that this will be ending soon, or that they must have found something to have spent this long and this much amount of time on it?
Right. I mean, it's not common for criminal investigators to spend this much time on a case if they don't think they're onto something. But, the U.S. Attorney has not given us any guideline as to how long this investigation would take. The State Attorney General headed this for the first year of the investigation, and he said in January that he thought it could take another year, so that we'd be coming up almost on that anniversary here in another 3 months. However, the state is no longer in charge of this investigation. Earlier this year, it got turned over to the FBI. They're leading it. They've been more tight-lipped about this. So, and also, the U.S. Department of Justice is conducting a separate investigation of whether there's been a pattern of civil rights violations. The FBI is part of the U.S. Department of Justice, and so the criminal and civil investigators seem to be working together, but that could complicate things and lead to a longer investigation.
All right. Well, thank you, Patrick, for that update. I know there's more stories in the pipeline, so you can find all of those at jsonline.com.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, we're back now to turn the attention to some local issues where it's also been a busy week. We're joined by Dan Bice, our Watchdog columnist, James Causey, one of the editorial page columnists. So let's talk about the city budget. Mayor Barrett unveiled a spending plan. Sort of the headline out of it, at least from their perspective at City Hall, was, look, there's more money going to police department now than all of the money that's going to be collected from property taxes. What's your take on that, James?
Well, honestly, this is more of a stopgap because we're losing so many cops due to retirement and them just leaving the force, and so we're trying to replace them with all these new officers. What that creates is we're going to have all these young officers on the force. They're going to be dealing with a community that they already have some issues with, so that could create some more problems. I don't think you could police yourself to solutions with the problems that we have in the city, and that's been a solution base that we've had from politicians throughout. Yeah. If we have more police, we could fix these problems.
Yeah, a lot of what's going on is some of the officers hired under Bill Clinton when he gave federal funding for police, and they expanded the officers there are now hitting retirement age.
Yeah, so we're adding about 160 to 180 cops, and we're losing about 160 to 180 cops. So it's
what
more
did you
money.
See in the budget, Dan? That was
the thing that didn't get. I mean, you mentioned it, but the thing that didn't get much attention was the lead abatement, and in particular, I'm interested in the lead water lines. I mean, it seems like there's a looming health crisis, and maybe even a major public health crisis that has already gone on. We're saying it's going to cost $500 to $700 million to replace all this stuff, and in this budget, there was $11 million set aside for lead abatement. I mean, that's just basically a drop in the bucket on this thing. And the alderman got a list this week of how many lines there are in each district. And it's interesting. Most people were thinking this was mainly on the north side. But the alderman who has the most of these is Tony Zielinski, and the one with the fifth most is Bob Donovan. So it's something that's throughout the community, and I've been hearing from aldermen that they're increasingly concerned about this.
Right, and it's really based on the age of the house as much as anything.
Right, any houses built before 1951. Right. So, but it's throughout the city. It's a major, major issue that's going to cost not tens of millions of dollars, but hundreds of millions of dollars to fix.
And I don't think a filter is the way to go about fixing these things. It almost seems like, okay, all you have to do is buy this filter and put it on, or let your water run on cold for a certain amount of time. That's kind of scary. I mean, the thing that pops into mind to me is Flint. So I think a lot of people are thinking about that, but the mayor is trying to calm everybody down. But I think you're right; it's a major issue.
But what we know is what they're trying to do going forward to fix this. What we don't know is what sort of problem this created in the past, and how widespread and how serious this is.
Yeah, well, let's talk about another local comments in the news that drew a lot of attention. This is from Buck's president Peter Fagan, who was last week in Madison. I made some comments about the city. I want to just read what was said in Madison, which drew the attention, and then sort of how I was walked back. But in Madison, Peter Fagan said, "Milwaukee is the most segregated, racist place I've ever experienced in my life. It just is a place that is antiquated, it is in desperate need of repair, and has happened for a long, long time. One of our messages and one of our goals is to lead by example. Once that got more attention here in town, that was kind of walked back to where now this new statement was, Milwaukee is a terrific community with wonderful people, and I am proud to be part of it. I was addressing a question about the social, economic, and geographic divides that exist and how we can help address them. It wasn't my intention to characterize the general community as overtly racist." So does that just go away? What happens? What's the fallout from?
I'll let you go first. Take this one first.
Well, I mean, what it comes across as is that he appears very ungrateful. He's getting $250 million in public funding from the state.
$400 million after
with interest. $400 million that these billionaires end up, the billionaire owners get to help them with the arena. And it's interesting because this happened a week ago. It got buried in the papers in Madison. It took a while for this to come to the surface. A number of people were quite upset about it. He at first doubled down on these comments on Mark Belling's show and then only walked it back. The thing is, it is true that the community, this 7-county regional area, is a highly segregated community.
Hyper-segregated. It's hyper-segregated. And people are saying, okay, yeah, we could agree. It is hyper-segregated here. But racist? Are you kidding me? We're not racist because no one wants to be racist, right? But we do have a lot of problems in this city that need to be addressed. One thing that I did like that he said is that the Bucks want to be a part of the solution, and they better be with the actually $400 million on the table.
And how are they as part of the solution?
Well, I talked to the mayor about
selling $100 seats to the basketball games.
By hiring people at a decent wage.
Right.
That's one solution. But I think they have to do more. They have to get the players out there and start talking to these people. They may have to make investments in the central city as well. And that starts at the top. So I want to see
what
that
didn't
happen.
work is an out-of-town guy giving a speech in Madison talking about all the problems in Milwaukee.
It was not the most tone-deaf.
But is there ever a
way
good
to
time to
it.
talk about race and segregation in the city? There's never a good time.
There's
to
a
talk
sliding
about that.
scale. I think that there are better times and worse times. That's probably not the best way to address the problem.
Yeah. All right, let's, in the time we have left, I want to move on to another important and interesting story we had this morning on a study by some researchers from Harvard and Yale and University of Oxford that looked at the police beating of Frank Jude and found, this is 12 or so years ago, that in the wake of that, 911 calls went down dramatically in the city, particularly in African-American neighborhoods. And there were they looked at some other less strong connections about did it affect the homicide rate and so forth. But what was your takeaway on that one, James?
Well, in 1990, Public Enemy, the rap group, said, "Get up, get up, get up in your town. 911's a joke in your town." Basically what they're saying is that if you call 911, the police will come when they want to, or they may not show up at all. Today, what we have is that when people call the police, you don't know what's going to happen. There's a belief in some parts of this community that if you call the police to take care of a situation, one of your loved ones may end up dead. And so that's a reality. And or if you call the police, something may happen to you. So we have to start thinking about that and realize that we have a real problem between police and the citizens that they're supposed to protect and serve. And so that's why we have this drop off in calls to 911.
So in the first debate between Trump and Clinton, it's interesting this issue came up and how they tried to address this issue, and it seems to me that they missed one of the crucial things. Trump said we need more law and order. Hillary Clinton said we need more cultural sensitivity training. But it seems like the thing that's lacking is trust. There's not much trust between the black community and the cops, and somewhat in the other direction too. So you can't legislate trust like that. It's something that you can't force on a community. But obviously, after the Frank Jude situation, it was something that was lacking here.
Honestly, I want to get to the point where we don't have to call the police every time we have problems in our neighborhoods. I want there to be a situation where black men can stand up in their communities and rectify problems for themselves, like we used to do when we had strong communities. The fact that we have to call 911 for a lot of things that we shouldn't be calling 911 for in the first place is a problem.
All right, let's turn now in the time we've got left to our winners and losers of the week. And Dan, let's start with your winner.
I have a surprising pick. Sheriff Clark and I don't always get along.
Really?
Yeah, that's.
So we haven't discussed that on our show.
But I'm picking him as a winner. He was on a plane flight this past week where a guy for a couple hours berated him the whole time. And it seems like he intervened once, but at the end of the flight, he ended up having the guy arrested and so forth. Got national attention for his handling of it. And from what I understand from talking to a passenger on the flight, he was very controlled and restrained, and he didn't respond the way probably many of us would have expected him to.
All right. And James, who's your winner of the week?
My winner of the week is Colin Kaepernick. At the start of the season, people were criticizing him for not standing up for the national anthem. Now he's created a movement where athletes, young and old, kids as young as high school and under, are now making a stance against standing up for the national anthem. And he even got the president today to say, maybe you should think about the military people that you're not standing up for. So he's getting people to talk about this, and that's powerful.
All right, and your loser of the week, James?
My loser of the week is anybody critical of Peter Fagan and not looking at what he said. What he said is that we have some serious problems here in this city and we need to look at them. So maybe we should start thinking about that instead of just thinking about this was a guy owning a team who took a lot of money from the arena bill.
That would make me a loser?
I'm
not taking it personally. I'm not going to take it personally. So my loser is Tom Nelson. We've targeted that race and said that this is a major and the only contested congressional race. In this past week, the DCCC out of Washington pulled advertising support from him, and today the Cook Report, which tracks races around the country, has moved this from, and Nelson's a Democrat, has moved this from a toss-up race to a race that's leaning to the Republicans.
All right, and finally, let's take a few viewer questions. This first one I'm going to throw to you, Dan, is from Madison Jane, who says, is Tommy Thompson right that the state is now trending toward Trump? He hasn't done so well in his recent political efforts, and I assume that means Tommy Thompson isn't maybe the best the prognosticator he was before. But what's your take on
even
that?
in office, he was not a great prognosticator, or he didn't have long coattails. Trump has gained in the polls. The last Marquette poll showed that he was down 2 or 4 points, depending on whether you're counting likely or registered voters. So he's gained ground, but all of those numbers come before his very poor performance in the debate. So my guess is that Clinton's lead is stabilized. And just remember, there is no poll in Wisconsin that's shown that Trump is ahead. There is a Reuters poll that shows it's 41-41, but that Reuters poll was taken over 20 days. So I don't think it's very
long period of time.
Extremely. It was from September 2nd to September 22nd. I've never heard of a poll going that long.
All right, I'm going to ask you this question, James, just very briefly, from Racine Raiders, who says, who will be the winner of the vice presidential debate? So, everyone remember who's in that?
Remember Scott Walker?
Mike Pence. Scott
Walker's helping Pence.
In
fact, he was in town yesterday.
I mean, man, I don't know. You will hope that Trump's guy pulls this off because he needs some help. But I'm not really sure. That's a race that I haven't really focused on. I've been mostly focused on Trump versus Hillary, so I don't know.
All right. Well, I'm guessing there'll be fewer interruptions and insults, perhaps, in the vice presidential debate than the presidential one. That's where we'll leave our discussion for today. We'll be back next Thursday at the same time at jsonline.com and on Facebook Live. Thanks for joining us.